On this edition of Whether or Not, our Nature in the News stories include NASA sending one of its newest astronauts into space for the first time this past week. And then also we have an update on your fall foliage here in central Pennsylvania. And then later on we do have a feature by Jacob Morse looking at the severe weather that struck Pennsylvania a few weeks ago. Whether or Not starts right now. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Patrick Wright.
And I'm your forecaster, Matt Hoenig.
So, Matt, what can we expect for coming up in the weather? Do we have a big pattern change coming?
Patrick, a big change is coming. So far this month, we've been talking about summer-like warmth with high temperatures during the daytime getting up into the 70s and even 80s in some cases. We'll be talking about temperatures in the 50s coming up in the extended forecast in just a little bit.
Well, I'm excited to get fall underway and pull out the sweatshirts and the cardigans. But up first of all, we have Nature in the News coming up. The newest member of the NASA Space Corps took his first trip to space earlier this week. Nick Hague, pictured Wright, joined the NASA Space Corps in 2013 and launched into space on Thursday from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan at 4:40 a.m. Eastern Time. He will be joined by Alexei Ovchkin from the Russian space agency Roscosmos for the trip, consisting of a 6-hour flight time to the International Space Station. The flight will include a 4-hour orbit, then a 2-hour trip to eventually dock with the station. The 2 astronauts will join 3 other astronauts already on board. While in space, the astronauts will be conducting experiments in biology, biotechnology, physical sciences, and earth sciences in the only microgravity laboratory permanently occupied by people.
We don't expect much color this early in October, but the leaves are starting to change in some parts of Pennsylvania. According to the Foliage Network, moderate color is starting to appear in the Poconos in northeastern Pennsylvania. Low color is being reported in the Lehigh Valley, the Susquehanna Valley, the Center region, and the Lake Shore. If you're looking for peak fall foliage, you'll have to travel into northern New York and New England. The Green and White Mountains are experiencing high color, and peak color is being reported in the Allagash of Maine.
Winter is just around the corner, and the Weather Channel has released its yearly winter storm name list. This year it includes names like Avery, Indra, Petra, and Zachary. The Weather Channel has been naming winter storms since the 2012 winter season with a goal to better communicate the weather to the public via social media. The names are given to storms that meet a certain criteria that include 2 million people being in a warning zone as defined by the National Weather Service alerts, or if a 400,000 square kilometer territory will be affected. There has been some debate to whether or not the naming of storms actually is helping communicate the impacts, or if it is just a ploy to gain more social media clicks and television views for the Weather Channel. A 2017 study by the University of Connecticut's Department of Communications and Journalism found that there seems to be no effect on ratings and credibility for the organization. Overall, more research still needs to be done in order to determine a storm's perceived impacts by people and how people are seeking information about the weather.
The streak of very warm mornings in State College continues. On Wednesday morning, the low temperature only fell to 70 degrees. That is nearly 30 degrees above the average low temperature of 44 degrees for this time of year. That shattered the previous record maximum low temperature of 65 degrees, set all the way back in 1914. It was also the latest 70-degree minimum temperature on record. The previous latest 70-degree minimum temperature was on October 6, 1941. As I'll discuss in the forecast coming up in a little bit, we won't be experiencing summer-like warmth for much longer. Well, we've been used to summer-like warmth. It's felt a lot more like August than October, but the tides are changing as we head into this weekend. A lot cooler conditions for for Friday, Saturday, and beyond that. Starting with Friday, though, an area of high pressure across the Midwest is going to keep this northwesterly flow in place, and that's going to bring in cooler temperatures closer to average for this time of year, and it will stay dry as well with a mixture of sunshine and clouds. For the day on Saturday, that area of high pressure doesn't really move much, so continuing to stay cool. It'll be mostly cloudy, though, on the day on Saturday. We could see a stray shower in a few spots, but most of the region will stay dry through much of Saturday, and then into Sunday a little bit more sunshine and a little bit warmer than Saturday, and staying dry across the region, but not noticeably warmer, as again that area of high pressure really won't budge too much, and we'll see some sunshine to start on Sunday. We'll talk about when we'll see more of those clouds in just a moment, but for the forecast for Friday, a mix of sun and clouds, feeling much more like October than it has over the past week or so. A high of 53 degrees Friday afternoon, and heading into the overnight hours of Friday, it will stay dry, but much, much cooler, especially at night, where we've been seeing very warm lows throughout much of the week. This week, getting down to 39 in State College. A few places in northern Pennsylvania will see their first frost of the season coming up on Friday night. And for the day on Saturday, it will be pretty chilly throughout much of the day, at least compared to what we've been used to. A high of 51 degrees. And of course, Saturday afternoon is the Penn State-Michigan State game. So you will want to have a couple jackets handy, as it will be noticeably cooler than it has been for the past several day football games. And again, a stray shower is possible in a few locations, but most areas will stay dry. Noticeably warmer on Sunday into the upper 50s, and with that sunshine, it'll feel a lot warmer as well. We'll start with that sunshine, then some clouds filter in late ahead of a new weather system that I'll talk about in the extended forecast coming up in a little bit. Now, this time last week, we were talking about a severe weather event across Pennsylvania. We had 14 tornadoes in the state on Tuesday, October 2nd, and Jacob Morse talks more about that in this feature coming up next.
October 2nd, 2018 will be remembered in Pennsylvania weather history for quite some time. During the afternoon and evening hours, a record-setting 14 tornadoes ripped through the state, affecting areas from the far southwestern corner of the state all the way up to the northeastern portions of the state. 4 of these tornadoes were rated EF2, while 6 of these tornadoes were rated EF1 on the enhanced Fujita scale. I sat down with PhD graduate student Brandon Katona with research specialties in mesoscale meteorology to talk about the rarity of this event and what caused all of these tornadoes to form.
In terms of rarity, it's pretty uncommon to see that many tornadoes on any October day in Pennsylvania history. I believe I saw the statistic that we had more tornadoes on October 2nd than we had in any October day combined for the last 50 or 60 years, since 1950. So we've pretty much outpaced all of the other October tornadoes together just on this one single day. It's actually the 4th largest tornado outbreak in Pennsylvania's history, behind 3 other pretty notable tornado outbreaks, June 1st and 2nd in 1998. Both were pretty substantial tornado outbreak days, and then the famous May 31st, 1985.
The Storm Prediction Center says that Pennsylvania has less than a 10% chance of seeing a tornado in the beginning of October, and there are a few factors that contribute to the low probability of a tornado in the month of October.
In October in Pennsylvania, we just don't tend to see a lot of thunderstorms, primarily because we don't have as many days with rich, moist air masses up in Pennsylvania in October. So this October in Pennsylvania has been characterized, with at least in the first half of the month, by relatively warm and humid air masses occupying most of the state. So it was just kind of waiting for a day with sufficient shear and mechanism to initiate storms, really to spark an outbreak like this, and that's what happened on the day. On October 2nd, there was a weak shortwave trough passing overhead in the mid levels of the atmosphere. And associated with that was a speed max. The speed max allowed for sufficient vertical wind shear to organize the cells that would occur later in the day. There was a weak cold front that was also drifting through Pennsylvania that day, which provided a mechanism for lift, and there was also a prefrontal trough ahead of the cold front that also allowed for some storms to form ahead of the front as well, which led to some of the extent of the outbreak in terms of it wasn't just focused along the front, it was actually over most of Pennsylvania on that day. And then we had quite a bit of instability as well. So when you have a warm and humid air mass in place, there is the potential for a lot of instability to occur. And we had lapse rates in the mid-levels of the atmosphere that were just sufficient enough to have about 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE, which is definitely more than sufficient for supercells.
CAPE, or convective available potential energy, is the positive buoyancy of an air parcel and a good indicator of atmospheric instability, which makes it a very valuable tool to predict severe weather. I noticed that many tornadoes were also lining up one right after another during the tornado outbreak.
As far as there being multiple supercells in a line, that's definitely a phenomenon that is rare by any means, especially in other parts of the country. As far as in Pennsylvania, I've seen that a couple of times where you kind of see supercells lining up one next to another. As far as what causes that, it's generally some type of outflow boundary or localized boundary in the winds that allows for supercells to constantly generate one after another in the same area.
With all of the tornadoes in Pennsylvania this year, I was curious if research is being done to increase tornado lead times.
Some of the most exciting research going on right now is the Warn on Forecast project, which may actually at some point allow us to issue tornado warnings from computer model simulations instead of just based on radar. So the hope is that if we can assimilate enough data about the storm into a model, we can run a variety of different simulations that get us potentially up to 50 or 100 different outcomes of what this storm might evolve into, and then we can develop probabilities of how likely this storm is to form a tornado at different times based on the simulations. So we can basically make a plot that says, okay, between these two times, the tornado or the supercell is 70% likely to make a tornado, so we'll issue a tornado warning. And so to me, that's kind of the future. But as far as what we can do in maybe the next 5 or 10 years before we get to that point is working on assimilating all of the satellite data that we have. That's something that Penn State is currently doing quite well at with our data assimilation research group. They just published a paper showing that if we can actually take all of the data that we're observing with our satellites instead of just the couple of parameters that we had been working with in the past, that we can get much better lead time in terms of knowing maybe earlier in the day where supercells are most likely to form and where they have potential to develop tornadoes.
Hopefully these research efforts will help to increase tornado lead times, helping to keep more people prepared and safe for any tornadoes that may impact Pennsylvania next year. For Weather or Not, I'm Jacob Morse.
If you're a fan of the fall-like temperatures, then this extended forecast is for you. But let's recap the weekend first. We've been seeing very warm temperatures as of late in the 70s and 80s. We're talking 50s for much of the weekend with fairly dry conditions, mix of sun and clouds at times. The only real chance for a stray shower comes Saturday afternoon. Into next week, though, we do have one threat of rain, and that's going to come on Monday. So a few showers definitely likely throughout the day Monday, and temperatures generally in the middle and upper 50s. But then for much of next week, it will be dry with sun and clouds and temperatures a little bit below average. Our average high for this time of year, around 62 degrees, will only be in the middle and upper 50s, but it'll feel a lot more like October.
So, Matt, it looks like we have a decent change in the temperatures coming. A little bit of a shock to the system, but I know I'm excited for it. You know, the Starbucks and the sweaters and everything coming out. Get to break them out finally.
It's been a very warm start to the fall with temperatures we've been talking about recently in the 70s and even some 80s in some cases. We haven't really felt temperatures quite yet this season in the 40s and 50s, so it's almost going to feel like we've gone straight from summer to winter, even though it's still October. But we do have the football game this weekend as well, and you'll definitely want to have an extra layer handy, as it won't only be cool during the afternoon, but also be a little bit breezy as well.
Breaking out the layers, breaking out the warm stuff, the fall stuff. I'm excited. So as we go from one extreme to the other in temperatures, as we are below average for this time of year for our highs over the next couple of days, you know, we had some extreme weather a few weeks ago, and our weather whiz quiz is related to this. And so the question was, how many tornado warnings were issued on October 2nd in Pennsylvania? A16, B29, C32, or D40? And so, Matt, what do you think?
Well, I already know the answer to this, and I don't want to give it away to our viewers, but if I had to guess, it's probably more than 16 and less than 40. And More than 29, and there's our answer right
And
there.
yeah,
C,
if
32.
you got- See, yeah, 32. Nicely done. So the 32 tornado warnings that were issued on October 2nd are a huge outlier in Pennsylvania's severe weather history. Before October 2nd, only 5 tornado warnings had been issued in Pennsylvania during the month of October since 1986. Also, only 2 months since 1986 have had more tornado warnings than the 32 warnings that were issued on October 2nd, and you have to go all the way back to 1998 to find these months.
This demonstrates just how rare the October 2nd tornado outbreak was and how widespread it was across the state, accumulating more tornado warnings in one day than have been issued for most months in Pennsylvania. Patrick, I remember covering that here at Penn State with the campus weather service, and we were just overwhelmed not only by the number of warnings, but also we had 14 tornadoes on that day. So a very, very special severe weather day in Pennsylvania history.
Very active. It was exhausting, but I think
Absolutely.
definitely a fun one to cover, but definitely serious stuff. So that's all the time we have for this episode. I'm Patrick Wright, your host.
And I'm your forecaster, Matt Hoenig.
Have a good one, everybody.